Welcome to part two of an extended Cordus Conversation with conductor, singer, and master teacher Cailin Marcel Manson. In part one, we talked about running music programs, leadership, community singing, and unfortunately, COVID-19. The conversation picks up where we left off. Mundi has this is an example of my point in this court. Cordus Mundi's done a series of virtual videos, and I'm sure you've watched anybody who does virtual videos. The first one is a bunch of deer staring frantically into the headlights, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens as you do a series of virtual videos, at some point it starts to occur to you that, oh, legitimate music making medium. And
Mm-hmm.
not only that, but it's an incredibly valuable learning experience.
Yes.
And it also, I must say this, it gives you an incredible appreciation of the video and audio editors.
Yes, absolutely. We are so like we were so lucky we were able to and that's what you talk about learning. Like we were able to do these things because we had a great team. And that's the other thing that I kind of wanted to get at is that before we go down that path, but we had a great team. There were so many times where I've worked so many places. I know you have too, where people kind of like stick their heads in the sand and just like, "Blah," and you're like, no, we literally were just like, look, we got to make this work. We've got to make this work. People were, people were appreciative of everybody stepping up. I actually don't think. I mean, there were some times where we literally, yes, we had to go above and beyond because things were shifting so fast, and we just needed to handle it. But we had everyone was down to make it work, and I'm like, I don't, and again, I lucked out. Like I feel like I lucked out. I had an award-winning filmmaker is the lecturer in screen studies right now, as one of the lecturers in screen studies right now, and he has a whole like cohort of screen studies majors that know how to like just work with the cameras and do interesting things. We have a visiting assistant professor right now who is a professional audio engineer and producer. And so he's just like, okay, do, oh, this is fine. It's like, oh, this is great, thanks. like,
Well,
so you appreciate them, but then the simple fact that they can sit there and go, oh, this is fine, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do that. You worry about that. That's kind of that whole team
well,
building team stuff that you're talking about.
this seems to be our theme: is this team and this community thing. What I was going to add to this, and you know who this is. I'm not going to remember his name. He's a choir director of one of the Boston groups. I watched on a panel discussion, and he basically said, look within your organization and find the angels in your organization, and
Mm,
more often than not, you will, whether it be from a board member or another singer or a donor or whatever, you'll find some of the support that you need. In our case, what happened is Steve Mallon, it turns,
mm,
is his hobby is video stuff. And
mm.
we didn't even know it. And Steve started putting things together. And so within our organization was virtually everything we needed. It's almost a smaller but a parallel kind of a thing. I was just very much struck by the idea of, you know, your angels are all. I don't want to be overly hippie about this, but the idea that your angels are all around you.
Absolutely.
If you're perceptive enough to find them, right?
Well, if you're perceptive enough to find them, and if you're open, and I guess this is like a theme, right? It's if you're perceptive enough to find them, but if you're open to the possibility. Like that's the other thing. Like and I'm gonna tell you flat out, like I have not. There was a mounting pressure in the choral role to do like virtual choir things or whatever, and that's not my twist. It's not everybody's twist. It's not my twist. And
Were you
and
were you feeling mounting pressure?
well, of course. I mean, everyone's like, yes, this is what I'm like. No, that is not. Nope, nope. I'm not. I'm like, there are other things that I can do.
Well,
I'm like Eric Whitaker and y'all can have that. That's wonderful. That's beautiful. That's not my twist.
may,
But there are other things,
I
huh?
on behalf of the choral world, may I apologize to you for any sense of pressure that you might have felt.
Oh my God, you don't need to apologize. Like there was, but I mean, and I get it. Like, I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, I get it. Like, I understand why there was a sense of because it really did. I mean, it really, and I know that it still exists. Like, there's really this sense. I mean, and let's be. You know, I tend to be as much of a straight shooter as I can.
Yes.
When you're in situations like this where you just don't know, I need to take a step back.
Okay.
Entering into the arts period, whether you're going into it as a performing practitioner or as an educator, because in a very in an it's I was just going to say it's endemic in our society, meaning United States of America in particular, that as artists, no matter how we practice or profess our discipline or profess our work, our field, we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Mm.
And so, because that's the nature of the beast that we stepped into, like that's the nature of what the work that we've constantly been doing. You constantly, as a music educator or as a visual arts educator or as a theater educator, constantly trying to argue for your reason to exist.
Mm.
And what when that's what you first of all grew up in, because your teachers who taught you were dealing with that. When you were in school learning how to do it, you were dealing with that. When you finally entered the profession full time or to whatever degree, you were dealing with that. When something like this happens, then of course I completely understand the pressure. Like you have to kind of you've got to argue for your own existence. And this seems to be the main way to do so.
Okay.
Got it.
Got it.
Like, I got it. But I also think that people just weren't being inventive enough. You know, Tan Dun and Eric Whitaker proved that this could be done in some way. So let's figure out how we can do it.
Yeah.
Great. However, there are other ways to do this, and this goes to something that this is a great dovetail because I'm sure it might take us down the other side, right? Which is I've actually been more this year. Like I've actually said this in previous years to previous boards that I've worked with, to previous organizations I was working with. That I'm like, we need to stop selling the fact that we need to stop being in this way. I know we're performing arts, but that we are selling a performance. You're not getting people to send you donations for a show. That is not actually what we're in. No, maybe there are some, but very few of the performing arts organizations that I have worked with or been in leadership of have literally the word shows or performances in their mission statement.
Right.
Most of them say to blah, blah, blah of great choral music, blah, 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 creativity, community, blah, blah, blah. They don't say our mission statement is to put on shows.
Let's have a show. Yeah, you're right.
And so why are you selling that? What you want, what you are saying, the reason why you get, because let's face it, Broadway is for profit. Like they're in the business of show. They put on shows. When they can't put on shows, they shut down. This is like that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not what you're doing. Like that's not what you're trying to get people to support. You're trying to get people, the reason why you're a 501c3 public charity is because what you do is a public good. It's a benefit to the community in which you reside. And so, what you need to be selling people is the support of the public good, not the show.
I like it.
And so, when I sit in the board and be like, well, how are we going to get people to donate? We're not doing a concert. I'm like, the same way you do it all. like, we're, it's not about the concert, it's about the people. It's about the fact that this contributes positively to where you live and the community and where in the community. This is why you exist, isn't it? So if this is why you say you exist, then you need to be doing the work of getting people to support that and not, ooh, look at the nice show we do twice a year.
Yeah.
Or 4 times a year or 10 times a year.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that, like, just bringing that to what I was talking about before, is like, okay, like, stop selling the show. The show is nice. That's great. But especially, and that's for me, especially as music educators, like, we are the first people to say, look, I mean, and I've said, I mean, I'm like, ooh, music increases test scores, and da 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 da, like, but like, what we're talking, you know, you want to talk on one end, like this, you want to talk in one way about how there's so many deeper learning that's done by by having students involved in the performing arts. But yet when the shit hit the fan, pardon me, when it hit the fan, you went right down the same transactional think that everyone that you say you're trying to fight against. And that is where, and that is not completely why I was like, not for the, you know, virtual choir thing or whatever, but I was like, no, my goal is the learning first. If they produce a choir, if they produce a video, fine. If they don't, fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the end of the day, I want the musicians, whether they are students, whether they are, you know, community members that are adults, I just want them to feel more, I want them to maintain and to feel connected to each other through the art form. That is the goal. And for many of them, they ain't trying to get on no camera and sing by themselves. That daunts them. So I'm going to diffuse that entirely. You know what? Let's talk about music. This is a great opportunity. We actually don't have to do a show. Y'all don't have to freak out because we have a dress rehearsal coming up. Matter of fact, no, we don't have to do that. You can just sit here. We can have an hour time. I'll give you a bunch of stuff to practice. But you can actually we can get to know each other. Like, I've literally, did online lectures and, you know, talking about, like, my thoughts about music theory, about conducting, about, you know, like, choral sound and vocal pedagogy and how they show up in a rehearsal. Like, and then to be able to sit there for an hour a month after, you know, maybe people have had a week or so to digest it, and just shoot the stuff with them. And just like, hey, you know, they had questions talking about this, about breathing, about, it's so interesting that you talked about fullness of tone and a true sustained voice forte instead of an exaggerated piano and all this other stuff these concepts. And I'm like, you mean to tell me, like I got literally 6 months to get to talk about the meta stuff, the meta artistic stuff with my community members, when usually if we were working on a concert, I might bring some of that stuff up in passing, but we got to concentrate on that this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that is so priceless, and we wouldn't have had that if we hadn't had this time.
And that's part of my point about that. Yes, you know, in the mud here there are jewels. You know that there are absolutely some valuable things have come out of this. You and I talked a couple of days ago. We talked about, you know, I posed the very simple idea about the glass half full as opposed to glass empty, and you nailed it. Which is, hey man, empty or full, it's a glass.
Yes, I'm like, it's like, who cares if there's water in it? Like, it's still a glass.
That I went to school on that. I want you to know. I mean that really made some sense to me. Um, and again, we talked about. Well, I said before, humans are clearly we're lazy, but we're also remarkably resourceful when we have to
Mm-hmm.
be, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to be. I want to ask you, singer to singer, a question or two. All right.
Sure.
Um, I want to know about. Well, let me preface it by saying this: as you no doubt know, teacher, most of us have not been singing or have not been singing anywhere near as much as we should be, or we
Mm-hmm.
certainly haven't been exercising or practicing. And as a result, our voices sound like, I'll use the word I heard earlier, our voices sound like shit. To varying degrees. Now, I'll just insert parenthetically that doing for Cordus, doing the virtual videos has been a very positive instructional experience for us, as we've all had to listen to just our own voices and say, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
and go back to square one and review some basic techniques. So my questions for you would be advice about either how to keep the instrument intact, and or we're headed hopefully towards we're going to start singing again in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, whenever it be. um,
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you have for us as singers?
Well, the one thing, so how can I put, one is very general. And I think that, and I think it's really important is that there's a whole lot of self-forgiveness that we all have to do right now. Because some of this, some of that resulted. Yes, voices didn't get used because they weren't going to rehearsal every week or something like that. But many of us who love singing sing all the time. And whether it's in the shower, whether it's at the piano if we have one at our home, whether it's in the car, we sing all the time. And the reason why self forgiveness is important is because we were actually in a particular we were in a perfect storm of a time where people who love to sing really just didn't. And I think we need to be okay with that. Um, the other side of this, the other piece of this, like following that to the next step though, is now that we're starting to get back into it, or people who have stayed into it, they need to understand that I think we understand it like intellectually, but not in practice or in reality. That the voice a is a relatively complex apparatus of muscles, and just like you work out or exercise, you're not like if your habits haven't been the same, then you're going to have to work back up, and it's going to be a slower process. And especially if you're an older person or an older voice, it's going to take longer for you to get back to where you felt you were. The other side of this is that for most people who are, I would say, regardless of level of talent or ability, the predominant way they sing has been in church choirs, community choirs, whatever. They don't pay a whole lot of attention. Many people don't pay a whole lot of attention to how they individually sound, because that's not what they're in it for. And now you're essentially singing really right for your own enjoyment. And there's something to be said for taking, at least in this moment, while you're still waiting to get together with the people you like to sing with, for just having a sense of abandon about it. Like the goal is that you're singing, and that, as I said before, that you're connected to the music and to the art and to what it does for you. And that is what you share with other people. Whether you hit that note perfectly or not is actually not the point. The point is that you're doing it. Now, there are resources out there. I mean, ACDA has resources. NATS, the National Association of Teachers of Singing, have resources. And all of these things, it's not like these things have a paywall. These things are available at the click of a button now that we've been in Zoom world and teleworld for almost a year. If you want a couple of tips or just some things that allow you to just throw your voice around in very low impact, and I mean that, I mean it, like, this is the other thing, it's like low impact ways, like, don't roll out be like feeling like, like, if you want to sing the whole score of Man of La Mancha, go right the hell ahead. That's fine. Just go into that knowing that you're doing it because you want to do it, not because, oh my God, you're all of a sudden going to be Richard Kiley, reincarnate. Like, that's just not going to happen. But otherwise, like, singing some pentascales in the middle of your range, singing, putting on the Mozart Requiem and singing the bass part of it, like, or the tenor part or whatever your part is, you sing just while you're cooking, like, things like that are things you can do to kind of keep yourself in shape, right? Like, but it's low impact.
Yeah.
And do it in ways, that completely diffuse that hyper scrutinization bit.
Yeah.
Like, it's because it's not about, it's this time, this time, when, how can I put it? I'm in a position where, yeah, I have to constantly assess singers and musicians. It's part of my job. But the other piece of that I've really, like, it's always been part of my teaching philosophy, my pedagogical ethos, if you want to call it that. But it's in excelsis now, right? Is it's, you need to get rid, like, you always have to connect to the joy of why you do it. You have to connect to the why. And the why is not some big grandiose thing. If you're like, oh, I'm doing this because we have a Carnegie Hall thing coming up. Well, I'm like, that's lovely, but to me, that's a delusion of grandeur. Like, it's like, no, that's not the why. If you're doing that because you want to do that, I mean, that's okay. I can't take that away from you. But to me, that's not the why. The why is because it's in you to do it. It's part of you. It's part of who you are. It's part of what it, like, that the whole thing that we say all the time. I say this to choirs. I say this to singers. I say this to instrumentalists. I'm like, you have to get to the point, whether all the notes are right or not, you've got to get to the point where the piece plays or sings you, not the other way around.
Amen. Amen.
And if you've lost that on the way to technical profession, you've shot yourself in the foot.
Amen.
So I don't know if that's like giving any tips, but it's like that. That's at least, I mean, I'll just say, there are a number of things. My friend Josh Collier, Nick Tochi, who I work with Barn Opera in Vermont, building an opera theater in a barn in central Vermont, rah rah. But, we did social distance opera, which allowed us to connect with singers around the world. And we were singing to opera, like, pianists were playing it, but we were singing to accompaniments in a can, like, doing recit to an accompaniment in a can. That presented all of these really interesting challenges. But I mean, we're talking like real esoteric, like highfalutin musicianship now, but at the same time, like, it was so beneficial. There was so many little discoveries where I was just like, oh, it's not ideal, but it can be done. And it actually made me think. Like, it made me think about how I was doing things, right? Like, I couldn't just fall back on it. And I actually learned, like, rather than, oh my God, this one note is off, this one, no, I'm like, I would do retakes. There were some times when I would do retakes, not because I didn't like how my voice sounded. There were some times where, yeah, that was a part of it, but I did retakes because I'm like, I want to hear myself sing that line another way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like the type of stuff that they do, like that's the other thing. Like, I can't imagine, you know, I realize it made, talk about putting things together. It made me realize like how many things we don't, that I do, like I do as a teacher or as a director, especially working with younger singers or when I do master classes or anything like that. But that I don't, that I finally have a little more time to really work it on my own stuff. Like when I'm preparing for recital, yeah, I do it. When I'm preparing for, you know, whatever. But when you're teaching and you have all this other stuff going on, you don't have a lot of time. You're still juggling a lot of stuff. But I'm like, in theater, when I would do plays or when you're like, you would read a line 15 different ways. Not to land on the way you want to do it, just to explore the palette. Right? Yeah, there are 15 different ways. There probably even more that I could read this line or give this line. Some of them will be completely determinant on what my acting partner gives me, right? But what about when you're doing a soliloquy, which is what most arias are?
Yes.
There's still 15 different ways. Like, yes, there's a phrase that the composer's written, but let's face it, like Bach and Handel, they really might, they would give like one dynamic. The whole like there wasn't a whole lot there. Like, yes, it's implied by the shape of the line maybe, but they don't give you a whole lot. So there's a lot of different ways you can expressively sing it that are not wrong. So you have to think, you have to play with it. And that element, I found myself more in the last 2 years, but definitely this year, sitting there with my students saying, okay, you know the notes, you know the words, the phrases are good, the legato could be better, but we'll work on that. Can you just play with it now?
Yes. 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 Yes.
Just play with it. I'm not going to tell you what's right. The only thing I might correct is if you're singing the right note. Like, okay, and I'll stop it and I'll let them sing it. I'm like, okay, on page list, just check that G sharp. You know, just check it. But I'm not going to tell you if it's right or wrong.
Yeah, man.
I'm
Yeah.
just going to ask you. I want you to play with it, and
Yeah.
then the only question I'm going to ask you is, why did you choose to do that there? Not because it's right or wrong, but because I want to engage. I want to get you in the habit of mind of engaging in a real deep conversation about why you make the artistic choices you make, and they don't have to be the same moment to moment. Because then you actually are developing how it is you say something. Like, people always talk about artists having something to say, but when they're in school or when they're in a rehearsal, whether they're professionals or not, they're always being dictated to. And it's like, no. Like, then you're telling them what they have to say. So all of a sudden, they get out of school or they get out of the rehearsal room or they get out of the coaching studio, and you expect them to have something unique to say when you didn't give them any time, any leeway, or even the tools. Even you didn't guide them along the mental pathway to allow them to develop that.
Yeah.
And sometimes all people, students, community members, all they need is the permission. I know they shouldn't need that. They shouldn't need that. But we are in, there's some, I said this in an interview. I said, music, there's something very decidedly military about music. People are waiting for orders. And when you say, that's nice, sing it. Just do it. We'll figure it. It almost, there's this weird thing, almost like the robot goes off and they're like, does not compute. And I'm just like, no. You're just going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to deal with that funny, nebulous, unsure thing. When I was working on what were we working on? We were working on the childhood. We were doing L'Enfance du Christ in English this time last year with the King Chorale, and I sat there and I'm like, okay, you're a part of this drama. I want altos and sopranos. I want you to just sing this line in in a way that just makes you enjoy it. I don't know what that's gonna be. I will hear it when you give it to me.
Half of them, I'm sure, looked at you quizzically, right?
Well, they were like, some of them had used to me saying that crap before. So they were like, okay, Cailin, whatever. But some people were new, and they were like, okay. We don't know. I mean, that's the other thing too. Like, we don't know how this is going to turn out. Oh my, I'm like, well, neither do I. We're going to find out together. How about that?
Yeah.
And then we could sit there, and then literally, all of a sudden, they'll look at there, and then they'll sing a phrase, and then the tenors and basses will look at each other. I'm like, "What do you think?" And they're like, "I'm like,
Yeah.
It's not because I told you, oh, make this. I mean, sometimes if you want to balance them, like shape the vowel this way, whatever, blah blah blah. We can come. There are ways that we can get the sound to cohere better, and that's where I go into mixer man mode. But the most important part of my job, actually, in those moments, were to just say, "Here's the road. Do what you want."
Yeah. Nice.
That was my job. My job was not to tell them what to do, but to show them a path and say, "Let's walk." Literally.
Let's walk.
Let's just go. Let's go. Figure out. We'll see literally in 35 seconds, because we're only talking about a phrase. In 35 seconds, from the beginning of one phrase to the end, we'll see where we ended up. I don't know what we're gonna end up.
Yeah.
But let's see. Let's see what this is, phrase by phrase. Let's go. And if you do that over the course of an entire piece, then you end up having a journey. And if people, if you can get, I just believe it. If you can get people who don't see themselves as artists to be willing to take those type of risks in a rehearsal process that then becomes a performance, and they learn how to be okay, even though they've practiced, with not knowing how the thing is going to end up, and being that vulnerable and being that open to the possibility, how much more do you think the audience is getting?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's about, I guess that's the whole thing. It's about, I want this time to leave us with changing, with doing a real sea change of how of our think about this thing that we all do.